The world blurred around Kevin as he staggered toward the cafe table. His throat burned from 3 days without water, his legs buckling under the weight of humiliation. But he had no choice. The shelter cutoff was in 2 hours, and this was his last chance. Hollywood legend sat alone, sipping black coffee, his sunglasses hiding eyes that had stared down outlaws in 100 movies. To everyone else, he was a legend. To Kevin, he was a target, a desperate gamble. "Sir, can you spare $1?" Kevin whispered, the words tasting like ash. The street noise died. Hollywood legend lowered his sunglasses, his gaze slicing through Kevin like a knife. For 10 agonizing seconds, he said nothing. Then with a voice rougher than gravel, "You think this is about $1?" Kevin froze. He'd prepared for pity, scorn, silence. Not this. Hollywood legend leaned forward, his chair creaking. "You're not here for money. You're here because you're tired of being invisible." A truck roared past, rattling the cafe windows. Kevin's cardboard sign slipped from his grip, the words "homeless. Please help," face down on the pavement. "Sit," Hollywood legend said. Not a request, but an order. Kevin collapsed into the chair, his heart hammering. He expected a sermon, a handout, a punchline. What he got was worse. "You want to live?" Hollywood legend said, cold as a gunslinger. "Or you want to keep dying in that alley?" The question hung in the air like a threat, and in that moment Kevin realized this wasn't charity. This was a reckoning. Kevin sat down, his movements hesitant, as if the chair might vanish beneath him. He placed his tattered cardboard sign on the edge of the table, angling it away from prying eyes. Hollywood legend leaned back in his chair, calm yet unreadable. Kevin swallowed, a knot of shame tightening in his chest. "I don't like asking," Kevin said quietly, "but I lost my job, my house, everything." Hollywood legend regarded him for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, voice cutting like a whip. "You lost your house, your car. What else did you lose, Kevin? Your guts? Your pride?" Kevin flinched, his fingers curling around the cardboard sign. He started tearing it into thin strips, each rip echoing how exposed he felt. "I'm not proud of this," he muttered, eyes downcast. "But it's been hard. Nobody wants to see a guy like me." Hollywood legend's gaze never wavered. "You're right. Most people look away. But I'm not most people." Kevin took a trembling breath. "I was a contractor once, had my own crew. Then the recession happened. No jobs, no savings left. Lost the house. Lost it all." His voice cracked, and he tore another piece from the sign. A hush fell between them. Kevin expected pity, but Hollywood legend's stare held something else, something fiercer. "You can't just expect handouts," Hollywood legend said darkly. "What are you willing to do to get back up?" Kevin's eyes stung with tears he refused to shed. "I'll do anything," he rasped, still shredding the cardboard, unable to stop the nervous motion of his hands. "I'm—" Hollywood legend cut him off. "You're not finished yet. Tell me what you lost inside. Your will? Your hope?" Kevin looked away, shame rolling over him in waves. "Maybe," he whispered. "I don't know." Hollywood legend leaned back, letting the tension coil. "Then you'd better find it, because nobody else is going to hand it to you." Kevin let the torn scraps of cardboard fall to the ground. He felt raw, exposed, yet somehow a flicker of determination sparked in the pit of his stomach. Hollywood legend made him feel uncomfortable, even angry, but that anger felt alive. "What's your name?" Hollywood legend asked finally. "Kevin," he said. "Kevin," Hollywood legend repeated. "So here's the question. You gonna keep walking around invisible, or are you gonna show the world you're still here?" Kevin stared at the shredded cardboard by his feet. He could leave, walk away, but deep down he knew this confrontation was exactly what he needed. The first step toward reclaiming who he was. Kevin's heart thundered after Hollywood legend's harsh words in the cafe. He was furious, intrigued, and desperate all at once. "What do you mean I haven't fought hard enough?" Kevin asked, voice tight with resentment. "I've been trying to survive out there." Hollywood legend snorted. "You think I don't know hunger? I ate dog food to survive the depression. Dog food. You're sitting here begging for scraps, but you haven't even tasted real hunger yet. A flush crept up Kevin's neck. You have no idea what it's like. Nobody will hire me. I've got no address, no clean clothes. Hollywood legend leveled a look at Kevin that spoke of endless Western showdowns. The world will knock you down every chance it gets. But do you lie there, or do you get back up? Kevin wanted to protest, to say that life wasn't that simple. Maybe you got lucky, he muttered. I'm not Hollywood legend. Hollywood legend leaned back, those weathered hands gripping his coffee cup. Luck's for gamblers, he said. I made choices. I crawled out of holes you can't imagine, because lying there was worse than the fight. Kevin swallowed. Some part of him hated Hollywood legend's tough love approach, but another part clung to each word like a lifeline. He'd never thought of the struggle as a choice. It always felt forced on him, an endless loop of failure. Hollywood legend took one last sip of coffee, then slid a business card across the table. A friend runs a shelter. They'll help you if you want it. But let me tell you something. This isn't a free pass. You'll have to earn every inch. Kevin stared at the card. Then why even bother giving it to me? Because I see a man who still has a spark left, Hollywood legend said quietly. And I'm betting he's mad enough, hungry enough to use it. Kevin's throat felt dry. Outside, traffic honked and people bustled by, oblivious to the storm raging at this little table. He looked at the card, then back at Hollywood legend. Okay, he said, voice trembling. I'll try. Hollywood legend nodded once, his face as unreadable as ever. Then stop saying try. Either do it or don't. Kevin blinked. And if I fail? Then fail trying to stand, not lying down, Hollywood legend said. Now get out of here. Kevin pushed back his chair, half dazed. As he left, he gripped the card so tight his knuckles turned white. The challenge had been thrown. Either seize this lifeline or sink deeper into nothingness. And whether he liked it or not, Hollywood legend had just forced him to make a choice. Kevin walked away from the cafe, business card clutched like a secret treasure. Each step weighed heavier as doubts chewed at him. His heartbeat spiked when he turned into a narrow alley, his usual shortcut, and spotted a group of familiar faces. A wiry man with hollow eyes stood up. Hey, Kevin, he sneered. What you got there? Kevin's stomach lurched. He tried to keep moving, but the man stepped closer, blocking his path. Don't play dumb, the man hissed, snatching the card from Kevin's hand. A shelter? You think you're better than us? A wave of panic surged through Kevin. He lunged for the card, but the man jerked away, waving it like a trophy. This ain't yours, he taunted. None of this is. Guys like us don't get second chances. Kevin's chest tightened. Give it back, he demanded, voice trembling with both fear and anger. The tension in the alley thickened, a few onlookers closing in. The man laughed cruelly, taunting him. What makes you so special, Kev? Hollywood legend give you a golden ticket? Desperation flared hot in Kevin's gut. He couldn't lose that card, his last shot. With a burst of adrenaline, he grabbed the man's wrist. The scuffle was brief and vicious. Shoves, curses, a frantic grab. Finally, Kevin pried the card free and staggered back, breathing hard. Keep thinking you're above us, the man spat, rubbing his sore wrist. See where it gets you. Kevin pressed himself against the alley wall, heart hammering. His eyes flicked to the torn corners of the card. It was still legible, but barely. Blood pounded in his ears as he realized how close he'd come to losing the only lifeline he had. He forced himself to turn and walk away, ignoring the mocking laughter behind him. Guilt piled on top of relief. Part of him wanted to yell that he wasn't better than anyone, but another part burned with stubborn determination. He deserved a shot, didn't he? By the time he reached the dumpster behind the convenience store, his makeshift home, his limbs felt like lead. Kevin dropped onto the cold concrete, pressing his back against the wall. The card shook in his hand, edges crumpled from the fight. He wanted to believe Hollywood legend's promise, but the confrontation left him rattled. He'd seen people try to get out before, only to slide back into these alleys. Why should he be any different? Even so, he couldn't let go of Hollywood legend's challenge. You haven't even tasted real hunger yet. The word stung. Maybe Hollywood legend was right. Maybe Kevin still had more to lose. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only reason to keep trying. Late into the night, Kevin sat there, mind racing. Doubt clashed with hope. Every time he glanced at the battered business card, he remembered the maniacal grin on that rival panhandler's face. It could have all disappeared so easily. Finally, Kevin tucked the card safely into his pocket. He'd made it this far. Maybe he could make it one step further. Tomorrow he would decide. But he already sensed the truth. If he didn't go to that shelter, he'd forever wonder what might have been. Morning arrived with a chill in the air. Kevin barely slept, his decision looming like a dark cloud. Clutching the battered business card, he trudged through the streets until he reached a squat building with a faded sign. The shelter. Its double doors screeched like a prison gate. Inside, a stern-faced security guard eyed Kevin's dirty clothes. "You caused trouble. You're out," he warned. Kevin swallowed, his pulse thudding. This was it, the moment that could change everything, or ruin it. The front desk was busy, phones ringing, staff hustling. He approached, hands shaking. I was told to come here," Kevin managed, sliding the card forward. A volunteer glanced at it, smiled, then nodded. "You're in the right place. Let's get you processed." Instant relief warred with lingering anxiety. As he followed the volunteer, Kevin noticed the eyes of other residents. Some guarded, some hollow, others curious. It felt like stepping into another world, a mix of desperation and fragile hope. He was led to a small office. A social worker, clipboard in hand, offered a tired but kind smile. "Name?" "Kevin," he said. "Kevin, we have some basic rules. No fighting, no substances, and you help with chores if you stay here. In return, we'll give you a meal, a bed, and a chance to get on your feet. You okay with that?" Kevin nodded, too drained to argue. Yes, it wasn't glamorous, and yes, it felt like he was under a microscope. But it was better than the dumpster behind a convenience store. The next few hours were a blur of forms, questions, and a quick medical check. At one point, Kevin was led to a shower room. The water pressure was weak, and the soap was institutional, but it was the best he'd felt in weeks. Scrubbing off layers of grime felt almost symbolic, a baptism into a new phase of life. When he emerged, a staff member handed him an old set of jeans and a t-shirt. They didn't fit perfectly, but at least they were clean. Kevin caught sight of himself in a mirror. His face was gaunt, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't look hopeless. Later in the cafeteria, he sat alone at a long table, sipping watery coffee and nibbling on a sandwich. The hum of conversation swirled around him. He felt out of place, unsure what to do next. A counselor approached, gently tapping the table. "Heard you might be interested in work," she said. "There's a place hiring for warehouse laborers, if you're up for it." Kevin nearly dropped his coffee. A job? So soon? He thought of Hollywood legend's voice. "Stop saying try. Either do it or don't." This was terrifying. But what was the alternative? "I'm interested," he replied, forcing steadiness into his voice. "Good," she said, handing him a small flyer. "They'll train you on site. It's not easy, but it's a start." Kevin stared at the paper, pulse racing. The path ahead was foggy, but at least now he wasn't standing still. Maybe Hollywood legend had been right. This could be the place where his story changed. On Kevin's third day at the warehouse, disaster struck. He was already exhausted from lifting crates for hours when he lost his grip. The crate crashed to the floor, shattering its contents, expensive electronics worth nearly $2,000. A hush fell over the loading dock as shards skittered across the concrete. The foreman stormed over, face flushed. "Clean it up," he snapped, "and then you're done. I can't afford careless workers." Kevin's heart dropped into his stomach. All he could think was, "I blew it." He pictured himself trudging back to the streets, the shelter doors slamming shut behind him. Hollywood legend's challenge echoed in his mind. "You want to live?" Rage and despair warred inside him. But one thing stood out. He was tired of giving up. Gritting his teeth, Kevin grabbed a broom and started sweeping. The rest of the crew drifted away, shaking their heads as if to say, "That's that." But Kevin didn't leave. Hours ticked by. He carefully salvaged any unbroken pieces, sorted the shards, and wiped down the floor until it was spotless. Long after midnight, he was still at it, back aching, hands trembling. At 3 a.m., the foreman returned, bleary-eyed. He stopped short at the sight of Kevin still working. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Kevin set aside the broom, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Fixing what I broke." The foreman's glare softened ever so slightly. "You're not on the clock." "I know," Kevin said simply. A silence stretched. Then the foreman looked away, muttering under his breath. "Fine. Be back tomorrow. But don't expect any more chances." Kevin exhaled shakily. It wasn't a pat on the back, but it wasn't a firing either. Relief mingled with a flicker of pride. He'd fought for this, for once in his life. Over the following weeks, he pushed himself even harder. Early mornings, late nights, whatever it took. Some co-workers openly doubted him, but a few started to nod in grudging respect. Kevin's pay was meager, but each check felt like another step away from rock bottom. Gradually, he built a reputation for reliability. The foreman, though gruff, assigned him additional tasks, testing his resolve. Kevin refused to buckle. He was done letting the world decide his worth. Every night he returned to the shelter, too exhausted to overthink. With each passing day, he saved a little more money, inching closer to moving out of the bunk dorm. The memory of the broken crate haunted him, a constant reminder of how easily things could slip away. But it also fueled him. One evening, Kevin stood at his makeshift locker, rereading the battered business card Hollywood legend had given him. He tucked it away, heart pounding at the thought of how far he'd come. Maybe he was nowhere near stable yet, but he was no longer drowning. He cleared his throat, grabbed his bag, and headed home. His home, even if it was just a shared apartment he'd managed to secure that week. And for the first time in years, Kevin allowed himself a small, genuine smile. Because this time, he hadn't just survived. He'd won a little piece of his life back. After months at the warehouse, Kevin found a tiny apartment he shared with two other people. The progress felt surreal. Each night, he lay on a thinner-than-paper mattress, staring at the chipped ceiling, recalling how a single conversation with Hollywood legend had set him on this path. But stability wasn't enough. Something in him ached to do more. One afternoon, he returned to the shelter where he'd started. The familiar buzz of voices and the clinical smell of disinfectant washed over him. A staff member recognized him. "Back for a visit?" "I want to volunteer," Kevin said. "I know what it's like to be here, needing help." He was put to work in the kitchen, dishing up hot meals. As he served, he caught the eye of a cynical-looking woman. Her hair was matted, her expression cold. She sneered at him. "You got lucky. Don't act like you're one of us anymore." Kevin's stomach tightened. He remembered that bitterness all too well. Yet he forced a kind smile, setting a tray in front of her. "Luck had nothing to do with it," he murmured. "It was a choice, one I almost didn't make." She rolled her eyes but took the tray. Kevin moved on, helping others in line, but her words stuck with him. He understood that cynicism, he'd had it at one point. As the evening wore on, he walked around sharing scraps of his story, telling anyone who'd listen that a single break could change everything. "You don't owe us anything," one man said, frowning. Kevin shook his head. "I know, but someone took a chance on me. Now I want to do the same." He stayed into the night, offering reassurance and listening to tales of heartbreak. It was exhausting in a way that physical labor never was, yet he felt more alive than he had in years. When he finally left, stepping into the cool air, Kevin's heart felt full. He couldn't save everyone. He wasn't Hollywood legend. But if one person found hope in his words, it would be worth it. Late one evening, Hollywood legend sat at his desk, a small lamp illuminating the letter in his hands. Kevin's words were uneven, as if he'd spent hours mulling over each sentence. But the gratitude shone through. Hollywood legend recalled the gaunt young man trembling at that cafe table, and a rare smile touched his lips. Leaning back, Hollywood legend let memories of his own struggles surface. Growing up poor during the Depression, scrambling for odd jobs, and surviving on almost nothing. A neighbor's unexpected kindness had once given him a lifeline, just like he'd offered Kevin. Finishing the letter, Hollywood legend tucked it gently into his drawer, where he kept mementos that grounded him. But he didn't close it right away. Instead, he pulled out another business card, the same shelter's information, laying it beside Kevin's letter. Outside, through the window, he noticed a young woman strumming a guitar on the sidewalk, her open case begging for coins. Hollywood legend stood, slipping the card into his pocket. At my age, I'm no superhero, he thought, but I can still do what's right. He left the house quietly, letter safe in the drawer. The rest of the world might remember Hollywood legend for his film roles and accolades, but for him, the small, genuine moments of humanity mattered more. Sometimes a single gesture was all it took to change a life. With a determined nod, Hollywood legend opened the front door and stepped into the night, ready to share that business card again. Kevin strolled down a busy sidewalk, the city lights flickering overhead. In his pocket, he still kept Hollywood legend's battered business card, his compass during the darkest days. He paused beside a dumpster where he'd once slept, a place that still smelled of stale garbage and regret. A figure hunched there, no older than 19, eyes wide with fear and desperation. Kevin's heart clenched. He remembered being that lost. Approaching gently, he held out a card of his own, one for the shelter. "Hey," he said softly, "let's talk." The kid glanced up, uncertain. Kevin offered a small, reassuring smile. "Trust me, I've been where you are." Not far away, the same cafe bustled with people who had no clue how a single conversation changed Kevin's life. For most, it was just another spot for coffee. For Kevin, it was the place where Hollywood legend had posed one blistering question. You want to live or you want to keep dying? He'd made his choice, and now he was helping someone else make theirs. It wasn't about grand rescues or movie moments. It was about passing on the spark that had been lit inside him. Across town, Hollywood legend sat at that cafe table again, sipping a coffee, scanning the crowd. He offered a subtle nod to a passerby who seemed down on his luck. Because sometimes hope was just that, a nod, a kind word, a card with a phone number. And for Kevin, hope had grown into a life worth living, defined not by his losses, but by what he was willing to give back.